Quick score update, the Colts are beating the Titans 24-3. Just so you guys know that. Go Colts. You guys don't care. Whatever. Forget you guys. Whatever. Non-Colts fans. Today we're talking about, we're continuing our series called Titles. We're looking at the idea of parenting. Now, for a lot of us in here, I would say for the vast majority of us in here, it might seem like an inapplicable topic because most of you do not have kids at this point that we are aware of. But here's something I was talking to the kind of the head of the police department for Oceanside for the past 30 years, goes to our church, and he was in the office the other day, and so I was talking to him, and he was talking about the dumbest criminals he's ever met. And he said there's one criminal who, this guy broke into someone's house, and then he stole their keys, but on their key ring was one of those tile, like GPS finder things, where like you can track your keys. Like it literally sends a signal to a satellite and tells you exactly where your keys are. So he stole that, and so the police literally just tracked the tile right to his house, and the guy's like sitting in his beanbag chair, naked eating Cheetos, and they're like, "Excuse me, you stole everything." So he got caught. But there's a lot of situations. When I lived in Bakersfield, our house got robbed twice when I lived there, when we were gone on vacation, and both times the cops were like, "Well, this happened probably over 6 hours ago." So we asked, like, "What are the odds of catching this guy?" And they're like, slim to none. What the heck? How is that possible? And what he said is, the reason that a lot of people, when they're stealing or kidnapping or whatever, the reason that a lot of them succeed is because they're the only ones with a plan. That's what he told me. He said a lot of people succeed because they have a plan. If you have any notion ahead of time about what you're going to do or how you're going to handle a situation, when it comes up, you're much more suited to handle it. Growing up and playing football and playing sports and stuff like that, our coaches would always tell us, envision. Think about what you're going to do. Like, picture the ball going through the hoop. Picture these things. Picture the pass you're going to make. In baseball, anticipate where you're going to throw before the ball gets to you. Know where you're going to go with it. In football, see the routes. As a quarterback, I used to run the route trees in my head before I'd even hike the ball. Knew exactly where I was going. And if you've got a game plan ahead of time, then when the actual execution comes, you're often going to do better at it. I think it's the self-same with parenting. A lot of times someone hands a baby to us for the first time in our life, and we're like, okay, I should probably learn how to be a parent now. And the research would say you're way too late at that point. The issue is, from now until the day you're going to have kids, who's going to teach you that stuff? Like, are you going to get a class on it? Like, it's not offered at the local community college, and you could read like what to expect when you're expecting forward and backward, but it won't prepare you mentally for the plan you're going to need to make in your head about what it's like to have kids. And so Natalie and I both had kids at a very young age. I had 3 kids before I turned 29, and Nat, you had your first, how old were you in your first kid?
21.
21. So Paige was 20 when she had her first, and she had her third kid when she was 24. So we just make babies, right? It's like kind of our favorite thing to do, which is biblical. Let me just read this verse for you. It says this: "Children are a heritage from the Lord. Children are like a reward from Jesus. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them," right? So it's like children are like arrows. You know what a quiver is? It's like the little satchel that carries all your arrows, like Legolas. So it says have babies, because they're like arrows. You can tackle stuff and they can do chores and junk. So what can I say? What was God's first command to Adam and Eve? Have sex. And then do what with sex? Be fruitful and multiply. I feel like we're just doing what God told us to do. So we're just making babies, right? Like we're going on baby number 4. We're not pregnant. I don't think we're pregnant. We don't know. Maybe I spoke into existence. But anyway, our plan is just have babies, right? To have a whole bunch of babies. But along with that, we want to be able to kind of relay some best practices and some ideas when it comes to parenting. And let me tell you some of the brute facts and some of the fear that we ought to have approaching the subject, but I think it'll cause us to lean in a little bit more. Which is, first and foremost, if you are a Christian, the odds of you having kids in your life are about 92%, which means 9 out of 10 of us, more than 9 out of 10 of us in this room will have babies at some point in our life, and 96% would say they want to. So that leaves another 4% that there's a 4% difference between those who want to and those who actually will in their life. But for the vast majority of us, we will be parents at some point. Now, here's where it gets terrifying. The number one way that your children or your future children, well, no, just your future children, not your present children, unless you've got children, in which case, no judgment, is this. The number one way that your children will perceive who God is through you. I mean, every analogy in Scripture, right, is that God, the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, which makes God the Father, which means the number one way that Peyton, Harper, and Brady, my 3 kids, are going to understand a father's love for them, even God's love for them, because of that analogy, is going to be the way that I love them. How they're going to understand discipline is the way that I discipline them. How they're going to understand the way that God views them, how God appreciates them, how God delights in them, how God is joyous for them, how God is a righteously angry God, and how they're going to perceive me, and how they perceive me is how they're going to perceive God. And a lot of times when I go speak at camps or I was speaking in Kansas City last year, and this kid came up to me and he goes, "You talked about us having God the Father." He goes, "I already have a father, I don't want another one." But essentially his idea was, my father is abusive, he's drunk, he's gone, he's absent, he's neglectful, he hurts my mom, he does all these things, so like, why would I want another father? His whole perception of who God was came through his lens of understanding what fathers were like, and his father was crap. So through that lens, he went, I don't want anything to do with God. So I taught on Romans chapter 8, which said God adopts us into his kingdom through sonship, that he calls out to us son and daughter, and we call back to him Abba, Father. And this kid just didn't want anything to do with it. So it's bigger than just like moral do-goodness or be a good parent so you can get gold stars or have your kid be the MVP someday or make sure they get into a good college. There's something bigger on the line, which is literally the first interaction with eternity that they're going to have through the means of understanding who God is and who God isn't, is through the way that we parent. Which ought to cause us all to lend an ear and to lean in a little bit on this conversation to go, if I can get prepared in advance and I can know something before my peers, or at least to start working through in my own heart, I think we're going to be in a much better place when it comes time to hold that baby in your arms for the first time and to look at this little version of you, okay, the character, as the Greek calls it, this copycat image of you that you hold that looks like you, it's going to think like you. For God's sakes, it's going to act like you when it gets older, right? Your DNA is its DNA. So if you tend towards anger, it will tend towards anger. If you tend towards jealousy, it will tend towards jealousy. That means that right now, our process of parenting has to begin at least through a mental process. How do we best set up ourselves to be well prepared when that time comes?
All right. The first thing that I want to point out in how we're going to do parenting best is to be eternity minded. Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And that's where we get this whole definition of sin, that we've fallen short of God's glory, that we're not holy and he is. We have to be separated from him. And in the garden, that caused shame. And shame is just this belief that underneath everything that we are unworthy of love or belonging. And as parents, that's what we're dealing with, is a child. Like, you look at a baby and you feel like, oh, they're not sinful, like they're innocent. They don't even have enough conscious thought to like intentionally do anything. But because they're born through human nature, because they've had that contact with humans, we all have this sin and shame nature in us. And as parents, we can see, oh, like my only jobs are incredibly stressful, to keep them alive, to keep them from dying, to make sure that they're fed and that they don't stick their fingers in light sockets, step off anything high, or impale themselves on anything sharp. And for a lot of parenting initially, that's what it is, and it's terrifying and exhausting. But we have this joy and this incredible opportunity that we're also shepherding a tiny soul that has an eternal existence. And that our goal is not only that they have a really successful 50 years, but that they have a 500-year plan, that on into eternity, that they're continuing to reap the rewards of accepting Christ and living for him and understanding the incredible worth and value that they have, not because of anything that they've done, but because of the worth and value that God gives them. Because of Christ dying on the cross, that he removes that shame and that sin from them. And so in that, it's so easy as parents to become concerned with what is temporal. Even as you guys, it's so easy to be concerned with the grades that you have, the stress that you feel, the friends, the social things that you have going on right now, and parents feel the exact same things for their children of, like, how do I keep them physically alive? How do I physically provide for their needs? How do I work hard enough to make sure that they have enough money? And that's, all of those things are pressing in on us. I know we can all agree that not being parents, you're still aware of those temporal, physical things pressing in on us. And the call as Christians is to set our minds above. Colossians 3:3 says, since you have been raised with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven where Christ sits. Think about the things of heaven, not of earth. Not these next 5 months or 5 years or 50 years, but into eternity, to be consumed with, how does this affect my eternity? And so as a parent, the choices that we make should be shepherded towards that goal of their eternity, not towards MVP or your GPA or being CEO of a company one day. And those things are really, really easy to get caught up in making those the priority. But when we make them the priority as parents, we really shortchange our children, that we care less about their character than the amount of time that you spend at a sports team. And those, maybe some of you have even seen those in your lives or your friends' lives where your friends were disadvantaged because your parents pushed so hard to be on that club team where you could never come to church on the weekends, or you never had time to have the community with Christians that actually hold you accountable, or that you're so consumed with stress that about school and grades that you found your entire worth in school and grades, and you don't believe that you have value or worth outside of those things. And as parents, our actual goal, like Chris said, it's terrifying, is that we get to shape how a child is going to receive that value. And I've met people, I think we've all met students in our time in ministry that had a deep-rooted disbelief in their worthiness. And to try and tell someone that Jesus gives them value and they don't have to earn it is one hurdle that as like ministers we can't overcome. That as parents, we have that huge responsibility to show our children that they're not worthy or valuable because of what they do, but because of what Christ did. And to even model in that the need that we have, that we aren't perfect, and that we so need God's grace to give us our worth and our value. And so in that, it's taking our focus as parents from what is temporary to what is ultimate, being eternity-minded and taking that into account through all the way from birth and keeping them alive, but teaching them about God's grace, and on up to even as we go through different stages of parenting and move on towards a different relationship between our kids.
One of the ways that we do this is there's a graduation process that happens with parenting that we need to be kind of keenly aware of. And this is kind of a best practice. As leaders in 1112, one of the cool things is we're working with a student ministry of this size for as long as we have. You know, like Nat and I, we've been here for 8 years, and Jake as well. For 8 years, we've been serving in this ministry, which means we've seen thousands and thousands of students run through this program. And what we've noticed is there is a natural progression that ought to happen in the life of a parent-child relationship, that when that is either delayed or it's premature, either on the part of the parent or the student, it causes a lot of the tension in our relationship. Let me give those to you right now, which is, what are the stages of parenting that we go through in the life of our children? The first one being the role of commander. So from infancy to about 5 years old, the first stage that we run into as parents is we play the role of commander in their life. Okay, if you think of a commander in the army, whether it be a male or female, what they do is they tell you what to do, and your answer is yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, absolutely, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. Those are our answers to a commander, right? There's not a lot of pushback, right? But the commander's job, just like in the army, is to accomplish the task and to keep his people alive. That's the role of a commander. That's the role of a parent at the beginning of a kid's life. The beginning of Peyton's life, my goal is commander. I don't go, let's talk about whether or not you ought to touch the light socket. I don't have some kind of repartee with him on whether or not he should play with scissors. I just take them away and say, no. I flick his hand. I spank his butt. Okay, that's you should know that in my family. We practice corporal punishment in my household. Okay, now it's disciplined corporal punishment, but it definitely is there. So we spank, we flick our kids' hands. We don't abuse them. You can tell your parents if you want to. I don't care. But we do that because from a young age, we want them to have a relationship internally between rebellion and pain. My goal from birth to 5 years old is to teach my kids there's a relationship between rebellion and pain. When you rebel, you will experience pain. Which is, why do I flick Peyton's hand when he reaches for a light socket? It doesn't feel good, right? Why do I do that? What am I teaching him? I'm teaching him that that means pain. Now, what I'm doing is I'm creating a small accident, a small interference, a small crash in order to avoid a big one, right? At that early of an age, my role isn't, well, let's let him figure it out. He's electrocuted. Okay, well, should have done that. Let's talk about it next time. No, it's just, no, you don't get to do that. You can't go there. Do not cross the street. You must hold my hand in the parking lot. This is what you have to do, okay? It's very oriented in keeping them alive. That is the role of the commander. The next is from about the age of 5 to about the age of 12. The next step in your relationship with your parent, or as a parent, your relationship with your child should be one of coach. If you've ever played for a sports team, you'll notice that the coach is a little bit of a hybrid of a commander. They are going to instruct you on what to do and what not to do, but they're not running it for you anymore. The coach can't get on the floor and shoot your baskets for you. They can instruct you on how you best ought to do that. They can pull you out of the game. They can ground you if they need to. They can put somebody else in. They're going to teach you resiliency in that phase, right? Run suicides. You guys ever run suicides as an athlete? Forget that junk, right? Which, suicides aren't even as bad. Any of you guys ever play basketball and you had to do bear crawls? Yeah. Oh, grr. It's the worst. Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. The problem of suffering. But a coach is very future-oriented. During this phase of your life with your kids, you should be very future-oriented. Okay, from 5 to 12, you're saying, don't do that because in the future you won't, or people won't want to hang out with you if you keep acting that way, where it's very future-oriented. If you do this, this will happen down the road. The next step, and that one, the goal of that is to change, to create change for the future. The next step, third step in that process, from about 13 to around 18, you move to the role of counselor. So whereas as a coach, what is the coach most concerned with his players on the court, right? What they do. The coach is most concerned with what you do. What do you accomplish? Where did you pass the ball? How did you shoot? Where did you dribble? Did you travel? Are you fouling people? It's much more based on action. The next phase of counselor is based much more on emotion. How did that make you feel when that happened? Your tension with your teacher right now, what is that causing for you? Where is there stress in your life? What brings you joy? Now we're starting to counsel them in this area, and the counseling section of parenting is much more based on the here and now. So if coaches are all about the future, the counselor portion is the future now. It's the present. When they're 13 to 18 years old, you're dealing with, what are you doing now? What are you wearing today? How are you acting, and how is it making people feel the way that you respond? So it's much more oriented to right now, and it deals much more with emotions than actions. Then, after you've moved out and you've moved on and you're financially independent, then your parents move into a role of the consultant. So presently in my life, I'll be 30 years old on New Year's Eve. I've got a pretty sweet birthday. You know, when I was a kid, I was really bummed about it because it was right around Christmas. But now, everyone has a party. Everyone's slightly wasted on my birthday. And so people are really affectionate on my, they're like, you're the best. You're happy birthday to you. I love you. And I'm like, thanks, Grandma. So anyway, at this section of my life, it is inappropriate for my parents to command me, to coach me, or to counsel me. It is appropriate for my parents to be consultants for me. Now, if you don't know what a role of a consultant is, let's say you start like a frozen yogurt firm, okay? And so you start a frozen yogurt shop, and you can't figure out how to sell more frozen yogurt, okay? So you would hire a consultant, okay, like the consultant Nathan, right? And you would say, hey, I want you to teach me how to sell more ice cream. And Nathan would come in, and he would consult. And a consultant says, here's what I would do. Notice, the consultant was asked for their opinion. And if I hire a consultant, do I have to do what they say? No. I hired you to give me consult. I don't need you to dictate it for me. So that's the role my parents presently play in my life. when my parents come to my house and they go, hey, I would really lock your door to your house, the back door, even when you go just down the street to get your mailbox. I go, or to get your mail from the mailbox. I go, thank you so much, but I didn't ask you, and I'm not going to do what you said, okay? If I go, hey, Mom and Dad, what do you see as something in my life where I could add added security? Then they could go, well, I'm glad you asked. Here's my opinion. The issue is, some of you have felt this tension in your life. When I started explaining one of these, it's disproportionate to how old you are right now. Some of you are going, well, almost all of you are going, I should have a counselor right now, but I feel like I have much more of a coach. Or my parents are really more of a commander. We used to call them helicopter parents because they kind of hovered over all of your issues. They're like, and they just kind of sat here, just, right? Even when we would meet with students, their parents would always be like, it's like, bro, back up, dog. Like, back up. Now we call them lawnmower parents because they've taken the next step. They don't just hover over anymore. They cut down all the obstacles in their way. Some of you have felt this, and you're like, my parents love me. They always call in my tardies. They lie for me. They go to bat for me when I'm in trouble. They do whatever I want whenever I want. It's like, that's not love. Okay? If your parent removes all obstacles in your life, they're not loving you because you're not growing. They're turning you into a 30-year-old, 3-year-old is what they're actually doing. Okay? That's not love. Okay? So, that's how that transition is supposed to take place in psychology. There's natural, from concrete thinking to concrete rational thinking to adolescent development. This is what the role we ought to play. There's two things. If you are 17 and your parents are still commanders of your life, you might be going, well, why do they do that? Well, if you've got an awful habit of doing everything backwards in your life, you might have brought that on yourself. Secondly, it might be the case that there's just a discrepancy between how old you are and how old your parents treat you. Now, you can either kick back all day long on, well, today I heard a sermon, you're supposed to be counselor, you're more of a coach. I promise you that's probably not going to help you. But the question is, if we do see a discrepancy between how we feel our parents ought to be parenting us and how they're actually parenting us, what kind of grace and truth ought we have in those scenarios?
And so my last point on parenting is that we are called to give grace as parents and as children. In that understanding of them being your parent or you as a parent one day and having a child, them being human and a sinner fallen short of the glory of God, that they would make mistakes. We almost have to break this kind of like idealistic, like little ceramic picture of what family looks like. That I don't think any of you, if you want to raise your hand, if you have that idealistic, perfect picture of what a family looks like, even the best families here, no one's going to say that every single person in that little scenario is perfect. There are broken children in that picture, and there's also broken parents. And I think if we just kind of let that be what it actually is, not try and idealize our lives and cry about what we wish it was or how they should treat us, but expect that out of brokenness, hurt people are going to hurt people. And out of shame, we always respond in sin. That's just what shame begets, more sin. And that's a very difficult thing to even overcome as a parent, to recognize your own shame and then choose to respond in a different way, or to choose to take responsibility and apologize to a child, how humbling that is. Those are such difficult things to do. And so in that, as children, I want to give you guys a call to give your parents grace, that you don't come with an instruction manual. A lot of times we are just making it up on the fly because there's not, the Bible, even with all of its wisdom, doesn't speak to every single specific scenario that you would know exactly what to do. A lot of times it is us just giving it our best guess. I promise you, your parents haven't really thought about how to parent a kid who's like 6 months older than you are right now. They're just thinking about how to parent you now and like survive and get through this right now. And that might be, you can sit from this side and judge it and say that's not preparing or you should do a better job. But ultimately, if we are not expecting anybody to be perfect because we know that they're not, then we're called to extend them the same grace that we've received from Christ. If like Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrate his own love for us in this, while we were still sinning, Christ died for us. If at our worst moments, this is something I think of so often, if I can think back to the moment of, maybe my most shameful moments and my deepest sin that I wish no one knew about, if that was the same moment that Jesus was on the cross dying for me, and he was conscious of both of those actions at the same time, and he chose the cross, how much more do I owe a debt of grace to everyone around me? So if your parents obviously have fallen short, whether they choose to sweep it under the rug or they choose to acknowledge it, whether they're a basket case and a disaster, and you have to live with the results of their verbal abuse and then bringing up your shames and reminding you of lies that you already tell yourself, or if they're trying the best they can and even in that well-intentioned, they're still going to mess up. Even Jake and myself, in our best intentions, we still screw up because we don't know how to do this thing well. If you can extend them grace in that and have an expectation that, yeah, you probably would screw up. I'm going to screw up when I'm a parent, so obviously you probably would screw up. Then God gets to use that, because God never promises to use our snark. He never promises to use us to teach our parents or to hold up a regulation of what a good parent is. But he does promise to use our grace that we extend. When we take his grace that we've received and we hand that to someone else, God can move in that, and God uses that. So if breaking that perfect little ceramic picture of what a family looks like kind of looks like a disaster and a mess, and if that seems super unfair to be asked to extend so much grace to someone who has hurt you so much, then the thing that I want to empower you in is how much that you have power, that you are able to move with God's grace. And the Bible is very crystal clear that Jesus doesn't see any differentiation between your age, between gender, but I'm going to say generation, and how you can influence the body of Christ. But like 1 Timothy says, have no one look down on you because you are young, but walk in faith and let the light of Christ lead through you. And that the way that you guys show your parents grace, the way that you keep your mouth shut or return a gentle answer that deflects hate, or just leading by example, that God can use that. For example, in my life, I've been blessed with really, really awesome parents, not perfect parents at all, but they're incredible, and I have no complaints about the way that they raised me the best that they could, obviously. But just a few years ago, I was going through a really difficult situation and there wasn't a clear answer on how to deal with it. It was a super controversial thing, and I kind of knew my dad was on the other side of it, not really necessarily agreeing with me, and so we just happened to be in the car and had a conversation, and I kind of told him about the situation, and then I was like, yeah, but after studying, there's not a black and white answer, so I'm just going to err on the side of love, because that's real black and white in the Bible, that you should love one another because Christ loved you. And that was it. And then he dropped me off. He was taking me to the airport. That was the end of the conversation. And then a few weeks later, my mom came to me and she was like, oh my gosh, when you talked to your dad, that was crazy. He went to his men's group the next morning and talked to all these men about what you talked about and erring on the side of love when there's not a black and white answer. And that was a group of men that my dad has met with at 5:30 in the morning, a bunch of old men that'll get up early that are 30, 40 men that I would never even have contact with, speak to, but they have influence over so many different pockets of North Coast Church, and that he was so moved that he spoke into their lives about something that is much easier to judge from the outside, that they could have their own ideas about what it could be, but that was able to affect that area. And I think it's not to toot my own horn that I did something amazing and changed all these people's lives. I really think that was God's grace working through that it was just me honestly speaking to my dad about something gently and the Holy Spirit using that. But just to know that you have such that ability in such a small thing. I did not think I was preaching to my dad in that moment or telling him how to do love or anything like that. I was just talking about my life. And when we walk in integrity and righteousness and walk in the grace of Christ, and our lives start to look different, our parents notice that. And whether your parents are Christian or not, whether they hate God or they even are pastors here at North Coast, you still have the capacity to influence them, to encourage them, to challenge them. But so much more is said in your grace for them and in the way that you respond and respect them than in any other smart comments or judgments that we have on them anytime.
Yeah. I want to close with just a few Best practices, some plumb lines. You know what a plumb line is? It's basically a string tied between two poles that is there for builders to know where to lay the foundation or where to lay the brick or where to lay the stucco. It helps us to see if we've got some simple guiding principles for parenting, they can help to inform a lot of things in our life. So let me give you a few of these things. Number one is when it comes to discipline, our family has really tied on to these three things. That when we discipline three things and three things kind of alone, which is we discipline dishonesty, disobedience, and disrespect, the 3 Ds. Why have we actually made a system by what we discipline? Because if you're not careful, you'll just discipline your kids all day, every day for everything they do. Because they could always be making a better decision than the one that they're making in that exact moment. So if you're not careful, you'll just keep going like, hey, don't hold your fork like that. Don't eat like that. Don't walk there. Don't say it like that. Correct your grammar. Right? And if you're not careful, you'll just discipline them for everything. And so we want to reserve discipline for them breaking one of those three things. Disrespect, right? You stick your tongue out at mom, or you mock me when I'm trying to give you correction. That's disrespect. That will be disciplined every time. If you are dishonest, if you say one thing and the other thing's actually true, or if you lie to me, that always breaks relationship. Or disobedience. I have told you very clearly what to do, and you have gone the opposite direction. That's blatant disobedience, and that's always going to be corrected. The question is, how do you correct it? And there's not a one-size-fits-all for families. Like I said, in my family, we spank our kids when they deserve it. We're not just like spankers. Let's pretend like I didn't talk about that at all. So we'll lay it out very clearly. And here's kind of our plumb line for when it comes to how we are to administer discipline. Here's what it is. We as parents ought to set clear expectations with our kids. Clear expectations. We ought to have consistent, and might I add, fair consequences. Clear expectations, which means in every situation, my kids know what success is and what failure is in terms of obedience. Trying to have a 4-year-old navigate the gray of what is appropriate in a scenario is not fair for them. Which is why I always get maybe your parents do this. I'm not trying to call them out, but we were at Wahoo's fish tacos the other day, and there was this 2-year-old, and her mom was like, "What do you want for lunch?" I'm all, give the kids some freaking fries. They don't know what they want. She started reading the menu to the 2-year-old. And in that phase of your concrete rational thinking, you're not ready for that kind of decision to be made. You just need food put in front of you. I don't know about your generation, but I never was asked what I wanted for lunch when I was 3. My mom put junk in front of me, and you ate it, or you were hungry. The end. This is not a restaurant. Mom said all the time, boy, this is not a restaurant. You eat the food, or you go hungry. I don't care, right? There's a hair in it. She's all, then eat the hair. I don't care. There was no room for nonsense. So clear expectations. Our kids in every moment ought to know when is success. Otherwise, it's kind of like walking around on eggshells or a minefield. When is mom or dad going to go off? And some of you have been a result, you've experienced that firsthand in your life where your parents literally are walking, talking minefields. Where you get home and one day they greet you a certain way, the next day doing the exact same thing, and they lose their cool with you. And so what it creates in you is people who are subjects or children of kind of pugnacious or catastrophic parents, they tend to be people pleasers. If you've got a parent who just goes off, you tend to compensate by being a people pleaser. You're very friendly. You're very congenial. Congenial? Okay, good. Congenial. You acquiesce. You're very kindly. You don't even say what your opinion is. And sometimes it leads to the worst. You'll compromise a lot of things then. And so we don't want to create that complex in our kids. So clear expectations met with consistent and fair consequences. Consistent and fair consequences. So that my kid, sometimes he's got to weigh it. If I do this, I know what's going to happen to me. If I do this, I know what's going to happen to me. Rather than having to walk in my room and go, I did the exact same thing 2 days in a row. One day I got a, hey, you shouldn't do that. The other day I got a spanking and whatever. But sometimes in my family, this is what I do. Sometimes I'll walk in and my son will know what he does and he starts to lose it. I'm like, Peyton, This happened the other day. Peyton, who ripped up this book? And he just starts, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You know? And sometimes I'll just grab him and I'll say, Peyton, what do you deserve right now? He goes, I deserve a spanking. You're correct. In our household, the expectation is clear. We do not ruin our property. These are things that we've been given. Mom and Dad worked very hard to afford these things, and this is disrespectful to rip up something that we have given you. When we disrespect our family, what happens? We get a spanking. That's correct. What do you deserve right now? A spanking. And every once in a while, I'll just go, Daddy's not going to spank you right now. Why? This is called mercy. Say mercy. Mercy. Mercy is when we deserve something, but someone doesn't give it to us. Like how we were sinners, and Christ died on the cross, and we deserved to go to hell, and he took that away from us. That's called mercy. Right now, should you get a spanking? Yeah, you're not going to get one today. You want to know why? I'm going to show you mercy. The issue with that now is whenever I get to know, he goes, Dad, will you show me mercy? No! But that's the beauty of, even of worshiping God the Father. Sometimes his mercy is that sometimes it's, you're going to feel the consequence of this one, kid. Sometimes not. And then lastly is discipline. And this is where we get off, especially in terms of like corporal punishment. The Bible actually talks about, he says at one point, basically spare the rod, which means if you don't teach your kid or discipline them strongly, then don't be surprised if they grow up and hit you with something. But the reason that we so push back on corporal punishment is because we have watched discipline administered without discipline. The Bible never says you're allowed to discipline unless you yourself are disciplined. That's the difference between good parenting and brash, brutal parenting. One of the things that I remember from growing up is sometimes my mom and dad would get in a fight, and in that moment, my dad realized I did something wrong. And when he would come in my room, I knew that my punishment was going to be worse because of the day that he was having. That is completely unfair. That's not discipline. So the other day, my son, there's a rule in our household. The girls next door to our house, these like two twin girls, they ripped a hole in our fence. They literally broke down this board because I think they think Peyton's really cute. So they ingress and egress through my yard all the time without asking. They just come in. Like, I'll be walking in the morning, I'm like, what the heck is... No, I'm like, they're on my trampoline outside, like... I'm like, go home! Don't you have a home? You too good for your home? So, they're just sitting there jumping. But the rule is, because we don't know their family super well, we love that they hang out with our kids, but Peyton, you're not allowed to go in their house, okay? Now, they might be the greatest family ever, but I don't know that. And until I'm really comfortable with it, you may not go in their house. You can ask permission, and if I know where you are, we might be able to discuss that, but you may not go in your house by yourself. So the other day, I go outside, Peyton, time for dinner. No response. Peyton and Harper had gone next door, and they were playing upstairs in their playroom. So now I'm watching the football game, right? I never get to watch the Colts play. I'd recorded it. Now I get to sit there and I get to watch it. And so I'm already like decompressing. I'm super tired. I've done everything. And then I've got to go over and I've got to get Peyton from this house. Well, what rule did he break? He went inside when he wasn't supposed to. What is this? It's putting me out. It's making me frustrated. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I don't want to put clothes on again. I want to watch the game. I don't want to fall behind. All these things in a row. How many of these things on my left hand are his fault? None of them. What did he do wrong? He went in the house when he wasn't supposed to. On another day, where if I was just outside mowing the lawn and he went in there, I would have gone in, knocked on the door, and I would have removed him. I would have disciplined him accordingly. I noticed in that moment what I want to do is to discipline him much more harshly, but that was undisciplined discipline. Discipline is when we walk in and we know that our discipline is coming not out of anger, but out of love. That's what it says in Scripture. God disciplines those that he loves, but he always does it in a way that is disciplined. Can I get angry? Yes, but that is not the time to discipline. We do not discipline in anger. We discipline in love. That's why people go like, well, if you spank your kid, you're just going to teach him to hit. No. Because I'm not teaching my kid to hit when you're angry, which is when kids want to hit. I'm teaching my kid correction in love. I never yell at my kid before I spank them. I always, hey, this is what I say to my kid. I would recommend you can adopt some form of this, but Brene Brown did a whole thing on shame. She wrote a book called Daring Greatly. And here's what she recommends, and I'd recommend the same thing to you. When I discipline my kid, I hold him in my arm, assuming it's Peyton because it's normally Peyton. Hold my arm and I say, Peyton, this is something that you did. This is not who you are. I tell him, a mistake is a moment in time. It's not a person. A mistake is an incident. It's not an identity. Peyton, you did something wrong, but that's what you did. It's not who you are. And then I tell him this. Peyton, you're not perfect. Okay? One of the most detrimental things that we can have in any household is a perception of perfection. The baby boomer generation, which is the generation that raised us, they have done more harm to your generation, not from the mistakes that they made, but from the perfection that they imposed on you. I do not remember my mom ever apologizing to me growing up, ever. Even today, if we go, oh, yeah, that was so messed up and you did it, my mom will go, no, that wasn't wrong. I didn't. It's like, Mom, it's okay. You're not okay. I'm not okay. That's okay. We have to be willing to apologize to our kids, to show our mistakes, to be very open, vulnerable with how we screw up. Because if our kids perceive that we need to be perfect, that's going to create a complex in them that's extremely unhealthy. So I say, Peyton, you're not perfect. In fact, you're hardwired for failure. You're going to mess up all the time. You're hardwired for it. You have a sin nature. Peyton, you're not perfect. You're hardwired for failure. And then I tell him, but because of Christ, in this household, you are always worthy of love and belonging here. You're not perfect. You're hardwired for failure. So every time, spanking, Peyton, grab him, whisper in his ear, Bubba, look at me. You're not perfect. You're hardwired for failure. But because of Jesus Christ and in my household, you will always be worthy of love and belonging. Always. Which means Peyton's place in my household has nothing to do with if he's a good kid or a bad kid or smart or GPA or MVP or CEO or CFO or any other acronym. It has everything to do with his last name, his initials. P-A-H. He's mine. That makes him mine. His worthiness of belonging and love in the doors of my household have nothing to do with whether he's a good kid or not, and everything to do with whose kid is he. And the Father says he's mine, and I say he's mine too. Those two things make my son eternally worthy of love and belonging in my eyes. You know what kind of foundation that sets for a kid to know that they can't lose love and they can't lose belonging? We want to create that. And I need you to hear that even from the Father himself, even from God himself this morning to you. Listen, child, you are going to fail. You're hardwired for it. You're not perfect. And if we all could see your deepest, darkest thoughts, not the projection that you bring to church, understand this. Even though he sees all that, because of the cross, in this room and in this ministry, you are always worthy of love and belonging here. Always. Not because you project a good person or because you're cool or you're popular. You belong here because you're God's. And we are his church. That's what makes you belong here. Remember that. Have grace for the parents. Have grace for your future selves. For we, nothing in this whole title series come with a manual. Let's pray. God, thank you for the grace that you extended to us, that our worthiness of your love and belonging have nothing to do with whether or not we sin every day or whether or not we mess up, for we are hardwired for failure. We are worthy of love and belonging because you've said that we are, you've called us it, and your promises are always yes and amen. And if you promise that there's nothing, Romans 8 says that there's nothing, neither death nor life, nor angels nor demons, nor anything else in all of creation, principalities, height nor depth, nor anything can separate us from you, then we cling to that promise, for your promises are yes and amen. May we have grace for our parents. May we understand fully that we don't even know what we don't know about parenting yet. But may we lean into the conversation to be ready for it when it comes. In your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.